Hi, this is Greg Kesich at the Portland Press Herald, and I'm here with the Sunday column team of Alan Caron and Cynthia Dill. And we're here to talk about the election that's coming up in 6 days, only 6 days. I saw a great tweet this morning that said, it's been so long since the Chicago Cubs won a World Series. The last time they won, this election hadn't even started yet. It was shorter than that. But anyway, so I know I'm checking out the websites and looking for signs and clues of what's going to happen, and I'm kind of tuned out all the content. I'm just sort of looking at the numbers. What are you guys looking at?
Well, I'm definitely looking at the polling, and also we're getting some last-minute endorsements. I thought Angus King's piece was somewhat strong today, not even mentioning parties, just speaking out for Hillary Clinton as the obvious, best leader when it comes to making the decision about war and peace. I thought that was, it just kind of cut through the partisan this, partisan that, and just let's, talk turkey.
Yeah, it was very. His record on endorsing things isn't great, right?
That's true.
I'm not sure they asked for that endorsement.
He endorsed
the campaign.
He endorsed both losers in the
record.
last campaign.
But it was it was a strong
piece.
piece. It was well done. It was interesting.
And to tell you the truth, I only read it because we were having this podcast, so I guess that's not really fair.
Okay. But everybody should run out and read it because it's a very good piece. And you want to summarize it?
Well, he just makes the case that as a senator, he took a ride on the plane that is used in connection with, dropping a nuclear bomb or engaging in some anti-missile defense strategy. And his point was that the decision has to be made in a very short amount of time based on conflicting accounts by people with various, political agendas. And the person who makes the decision has to be calm, informed, and responsible. And he, I think, makes the case that Donald Trump obviously is not that person. Look at what he does at night and, with his Twitter account and, his whole record of just lying about, everything and then lying about lying. I mean, he can't remember if he supported the Iraq war. I mean, the birther lie. He's not the right person we want making such an important decision.
Right. Right, and there's certain aspects of our system where there really aren't checks and balances. There comes a time when there's one person making the decision. And it's not a matter of, right, and as he said, everybody in the room is saying something different.
Right.
Yeah.
And I think his main point is that Hillary Clinton, you can count on her making a decision that's in the best interest of the country. And I don't think Donald Trump has really demonstrated at all that he's in this for the better of the country. It's all about him. It's about him, achieving some pinnacle and otherwise, in his own mind, illustrious, power grab after power grab.
So we all write columns. Do we think that kind of commentary moves anybody?
I think there are a relatively small a group of people who are still undecided, who are leaning one way or the other. And I think we saw the effects of that in the last 10 days. I mean, Hillary had a pretty good lead 10 days ago. And one announcement from the FBI that they are looking at something, they don't quite know what it is, but it's something, it could be something, maybe it isn't, really has swung the numbers. And to me, that's all people who are very nervous about Trump and were kind of leaning towards Clinton and sprung back. And whether they're going to stay back or not, whether there'll be some last minute remorse, I don't know. But it's been interesting to me that let's call it 10% of the population that is still in play is so volatile to have moved the numbers. I mean, I don't think people in the polling, as it's been changing around the country, have gone, I think most people are locked in to their vote. And the whole thing is about this, if you wanted to reduce it to sort of Republican moderate women and some others, they just can't stand Trump, and they're not comfortable going to Clinton, and I think they're moving around some. And it's interesting to me watching this campaign that almost all of the Clinton advertising now is directed at women.
Right, and it's almost none of it features her. It's almost all Trump speaking.
Well, it's so powerful.
Right.
I mean, it's just so powerful.
But those are the ads they were running 6 weeks ago. 4 weeks ago when they expanded their lead. I
Right.
mean, they really sort of pushed him down and pushed themselves up.
Yeah.
And, we all know they were hoping to go all positive here in the last 10 days, and they
Yeah.
weren't able to do it because the numbers were tightening. So it's been an interesting race.
Very, very interesting. I thought the impact that the Comey letter, all 2 paragraphs of it, was fascinating. And clearly, as you said, it moved the numbers. I still think Clinton's ahead in the national polls by a few percentage points. And I think, if there's any silver lining for Clinton supporters, it's that this little Comey incident really has impressed upon the need to execute this election in typical Clinton fashion. I mean, the Clinton campaign is so organized. I mean,
We should probably say that's a metaphor.
Yeah.
Some people might think that they,
Yeah.
They actually do execute people.
Yeah, right. Oh, I'm sure they do. I'm sure they do, right. But, I mean, I think it's really going to come down to now which campaign can get people to the polls and who has the ground game in the organization to get those few people who might be on the fence to the polls on Election Day. It's so maybe it's a kick in the, rear for some people who might have thought, oh, Clinton has it in the bag. I don't have to worry that much. I don't have to work that hard.
Yeah. So it struck me that Republicans, or at least Trump Republicans, are viewing this election as sort of an emotional crusade, and how are you going to get people so upset that they're going to, take to the streets and win the election. And Democrats, maybe not you, but many Democrats seem to have kind of a technical approach to it, where we're just going to have the best ground game. We hear about, I think Hillary Clinton has 30 paid staffers in Maine. The state party has a lot of people. They're identifying their voters. They're turning them out. It's sort of a more of a like a mechanical operation than trying to win over people's hearts. And I'm wondering, do you see it that way? Is there a difference in approach to the way the two parties do politics?
I think there has to be both, really, to have a successful outcome. I mean, you can't just have a demagogue and like a feel-good rally. I mean, look at, everyone thought people who supported Bernie Sanders, I was at the Democratic National Convention, they were just absolutely surprised when they showed up in Philly and saw that, oh, wow, there's a lot more people that support Clinton than I imagined, because they were just so in their
Yeah.
in their echo
Sure,
chamber, just talking to people and I think, the fact that Bernie Sanders could attract so many people at rallies just kind of gave the impression that, like, wow, he's really winning. But
Right.
it's really, it really is a numbers game. And so you need both. I mean, I think it's not Hillary Clinton's style to be a personality as big as Donald Trump. She'll never be that candidate that
Right.
is almost, worshipped and a rock star. But that's, frankly, that's not who a lot of people want for president. Getting back to this women thing, I think most college-educated women want somebody who's going to be president, who's not, always in the spotlight, who actually is home reading the fine print and organizing and doing the numbers and really having a recipe for success, as opposed to just, a moment of glory.
So is that like a reflection on the candidates, the way the campaigns are run?
I think so.
I think there are two troubling numbers in the polling in the last 10 days that I would imagine trouble the Clinton people somewhat. One is the enthusiasm gap, where Republicans are more enthusiastic now as a result of I'm talking about the period since the release of the FBI letter. But they are slightly more enthusiastic. And the other thing is this who do you trust issue, where now Clinton is behind by 9 points. And
It's incredible to me.
Yeah, and as the New York Times, has done all these fact checks, and you have Trump, who's two times out of 3, he gets the Pinocchio, the worst rating, and in her case, 1 out of 6. But he is more trusted now by the American people by 9 points than she is. It's extraordinary how that could happen, and it shows how effectively I think Republicans have caricatured her.
Right.
And they were running all these ads about she lies, and it's sinking in. That's not to say they're going to win, but that has to be creating some sleepless nights at the national campaign headquarters for Clinton. Now, Cynthia's exactly right. They have a much better field operation. They have a lot more money. I thought it was fun this week that the Clinton campaign was spending $14 million on TV nationally, which was a downgrade. And then Trump loaned himself a bunch of money. They put $25 million out, and then Clinton counted with 37. So the Clinton campaign has a lot more money and a lot more field organization, and they just have to hope that they can spin this all to enthusiasm in the last 5 days.
If this ends up being a close race, are we going to look at how much money you need differently? I mean, Trump has always been running his campaign on the cheap, and if it's close, will other people learn from that maybe you don't need to spend that much?
Well, we already saw that with LePage. I mean, I think
Right.
a lot, and to a certain extent, there's several Republicans who take pride in the fact that they've won, elections, not gobbling up a lot of money. I mean, the money thing does become sort of a crazy machine where you keep raising more money to pay people to raise money, and there's not a lot of net value. But I just want to touch on the enthusiasm thing. I mean, I think some people mistake anger with enthusiasm. Yeah. I think that people who support Trump are just so angry. Like, I'll give you a perfect example. I'm riding down the highway after a Patriots game. I have a, Hillary sticker on the back of my car, and there's a guy in a pickup truck, and he keeps just coming up to the side of my car and screaming out, "Trump, Hillary belongs in jail." He was just so angry and crazed about it that I think there's so many people who are supporting Hillary who are just shutting up about it because they don't want to be the object of this wrath. So I predict that Hillary is going to win. She's going to win by larger numbers than any of the pundits and any of the polling suggests, because Trump supporters are angry, they're bullies, and they're in many ways silencing the enthusiasm otherwise would be expressed.
That's interesting, because you often hear the other thing expressed, that Trump is underpolling because people are afraid to announce themselves as Trump supporters in polite society.
That could be true.
But
yeah, and it's hard to know which of those things is true. I don't think anyone has really figured out. I mean, I've heard that argument,
yeah.
But you also hear of moderate Republicans who are not for Trump and who will vote for Clinton, but aren't going to tell anybody in the neighborhood.
Right.
They may not even tell anybody in their family.
Right.
And so there's a sort of walking silent conspiracy. I don't know which of those is true.
What do we think Susan Collins is going to vote for?
Well, I was just thinking, I mean, she's going to go into the voting booth, and I just can't believe that she would vote for anyone other than Hillary Clinton. But, she said she's not voting for Hillary Clinton, but I just can't believe that. It just seems like a death wish. If you want to have a functioning Senate, why you would choose someone who's just going to, burn the place down.
Yeah. All right, so we're having a big election in Maine as well, and there's a lot of referendum questions on the table. And our polling shows that all of them are ahead. The only one that was less than 50% was number 5, ranked choice voting, with a big undecided. But I'm thinking, I just sense that we're in a very anxious time. And in times of anxiety, people don't like to make a lot of big changes. And so I'm thinking some of them are going to go down, despite what they show in the polls. And I would like to offer up my candidate for the surprise loser, which would be question 1, the marijuana referendum. And my thinking here is I'm seeing multiple groups opposing it, but I'm only seeing one group behind it. And it's hard to imagine that I see the group behind it are people in the industry in coalition with sort of civil libertarian liberal types. That's not an official term, but anyway,
The scientific term.
Good kind of the kind of people you might expect. Maybe not big marijuana users, but maybe not even marijuana users, but people who just don't think you should go to jail for drugs. And opposing it, I see this weird coalition of, there's the actual law and order people, and there are a lot of medical people, and then there's the medical marijuana industry is all over the place on it, and I'm running into a group of pro-legalization, pro-marijuana antis who don't want it to be a corporate takeover of this thing that they like, and they want legalization, but not this legalization, and they want like complete legalization where everybody can grow and buy and sell it as much as they want, like tomatoes in a farmer's market. So I think all these groups together are going to come together and they're going to vote no.
Well, you might be right because I voted no, and I
Yeah.
think marijuana should be legal, and I'm considered, I guess, sort of a liberal lefty type. And
But you have teenage kids, right?
well, I do, but
That seems to be another group. I'm sorry to interrupt.
Yeah,
you, but
no.
That's another group that parents of teenage kids
Right.
are don't like it.
Yeah, I mean, my kids now are 21 and 20, but still, it wasn't really them so much because my daughter goes to school in Colorado where it is legal.
Yeah.
But it was more just the legal opinions of Janet Mills and Stephanie Anderson kind of spooked me a little bit. Plus, this whole idea that still banks can't do business with marijuana businesses just really strikes me as a problem. Like, how are we going to regulate these businesses if they're all cash and they can't have banking relationships? It just, I don't know, maybe that's the geeky lawyer in me, but that raises a big flag for me.
Well, how do they do it with the medical marijuana business?
It's cash.
Okay.
And they have, security that, they have to just operate in cash. It's just it's a challenging thing. I mean, the medical marijuana industry has regulations because we have this system in place where there's doctors, checks and balances, and, you need a caregiver and you need the certain licenses or whatever, but they have to do it all the transactions are cash. And if that's going to expand to the general public and we think we're going to regulate it and tax it, I just think, yeah, right.
Okay.
I agree, though, that I think that's the one that there's an undertow happening, moving towards the no position, and would not surprise me at all if that fails.
Yeah.
I don't think it's going to succeed if it does in anywhere near the margins that we were all thinking about a month or two ago. There's a lot of chatter out there among just regular folks, and I think Janet Mills sparked that turn somewhat, and others, but would not surprise me at all if that goes down.
You have a prediction about a question that's going to go down in flames?
No. I think if there were one that goes down in flames, it's that one, ironically.
Yeah.
No
We'll
pun
have to take a
intended.
big inhale. Well, I sort of think question 2 is going to crash and burn.
Oh, really?
That's the question that, taxes families with incomes above $200,000, and the purpose is a good one, which is to divert more tax revenue to public education. But I just think there's still a lingering bad taste in people's mouths about the whole referendum about, the state paying 55% of the cost of education. I mean, that just hasn't worked, and it's been so frustrating because, like, what do you mean? I voted for it. Why isn't the state doing it? And it's like the state's not doing it because tax law is so complicated, and just because you say, you want the state to pay 55% of the cost of education, it doesn't get done unless you have a willing legislature and a willing governor. And this is another instance where it's a promise. Oh, sure, more money for schools, but I
I'm wondering if it doesn't get into this, elite versus non-elite. Like the elite opinion is all lined up against two, and it's such a simple question: more money for schools, tax people who make more than
Tax the rich
$200,000.
and have more money for schools.
Yeah.
is a pretty potent combination. I'm not sure that voters are going to get to the level that we're talking about, of technicality on it. My sense is they're going to look at those two things.
Yeah.
And it's sort of like, do you want better roads, and the feds will put in half the money. Okay, I'm good with that.
Okay. Yeah.
Right.
And do you want to tax rich people and have more money for your schools? Okay, I would be surprised if that goes down.
Although the Republicans in Maine have taken a lot of credit for reducing the Maine tax rates, and I
Right.
think the argument that if passed, this will put Maine the second highest taxed state in the nation has some, ring to it. I think, I don't know, I don't think people in Maine want to constantly be the outlier, constantly be, looked to as, like, we have the worst governor and we have the highest tax. I mean, that's just like really
Well, so
bad
you're on the same
combination.
side as the governor on this one.
Well, those are all serious
Yeah.
problems. I agree with them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, the outlier problem is huge, and we're already there. But it's hard to, maybe you're right. I mean, we'll see. But
Yeah.
what is your polling showing on that question?
It showed it with a sizable lead.
Yeah.
But it's hard to say, right? How much can we trust polling this year?
Yeah, I spent some time last week with some people who are working in opposition to that.
Yeah.
They weren't it wasn't a particularly happy,
Yeah.
joyful group.
You see, the governor said that if 2 and 4 pass, he'll leave the state.
Oh, well, then I could be
Don't
having
put
a
that on
change
the
of
ballot.
heart as I sit here. May I have to vote?
But what do you make of the number and heft of the issues that are up on the ballot this year? It's unusual, isn't it? I mean, you've done referendum campaigns,
Yeah.
but
Well, I'm going to be an outlier maybe, but I think we're going too far with referendums. I think there are too many of them, and I think we've lost control of them. I mean, when I was doing referendums in the 90s, they were mostly based here. They were legitimate upsurges of opinion that originated here. And I think now what's happening is there's a national referendum machinery that figures out how to move an issue nationally and sort of plants the seeds here and finds the right people and provides all the money. And to me, I'm going to write about this at some point, it's a little like town meetings in which people from 5 towns over can pack your hall and vote for things. There's not a complete parallel, but I'm
or at least set the
increasingly
agenda,
concerned
right?
about.
Decide what you get to vote on.
Yeah, that's
Yeah,
right.
yeah.
And put a lot of money in advertising into the living rooms of Mainers. It feels to me like we're losing control of the intent and the purpose of referendums. And I'm a diehard referendum supporter, but they ought to be used, I think, more cautiously. And we've got to find a way to get the national players out of state referendums.
I disagree respectfully. I don't know, this idea that somehow national versus Maine, it strikes me as, I guess because I'm not from Maine, I get my back up a little bit because I'm always the person from away, and there's always some suggestion that, people in Maine have like somehow a better capacity to understand issues, or so I'm not worried so much about national money coming in, because when I look at some of the referendums like casinos, I mean, I just don't ever sign a referendum petition to get the question on the ballot because I don't believe in them, and I don't think that they should be a referendum. But all the other issues this year, I think, have provided great discourse. I mean, we've seen a level of discourse around marijuana, around taxes, around the minimum wage that we wouldn't otherwise have, because you look at the national race and all we talk about are the personalities and the scandals, whereas at least the referendum questions that we've had serious public policy debates, and now whether they're going to actually impact the law, and that's another question. But I actually think it's a healthy exercise in democracy, and I'm not worried so much about the outside money, because I just think there's always two sides to national money, and the issue is going to play out regardless of the level of financing. I just think, like right now we have the NRA on question 3 on one side, we have every town for gun safety on the other, and it's still bringing out the usual players. David Trahan opposed to the background checks, and the gun control advocates on the other side. Now, so we have local voices who have resources from outside having an elevated debate about background checks. I think that's okay.
Yeah, and I've been concerned since the right was doing this.
Right.
Now the left is doing
Yeah.
it. So
Yeah.
more Democrats are happy about it.
Yeah.
Because of the issues that have been presented. But back when the national anti-gay rights folks were generating referendum after referendum here, forcing us to vote repeatedly, there was a lot of concern on the left then.
Yeah.
And so I have the same concern I had at that time.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe it's a little too easy to do, because I think any national organization with $100,000 can get a referendum on the Maine ballot on any issue they want to do. And I don't know what the solution is, but that worries me in the longer term, when it's not issues that we are happy to have debated.
Right.
And some, it's hard, so I have that sort of lingering concern now that are we approaching a point in which we really have to take a look at what's happening here?
I felt like none of them were really yes or no questions.
There's that.
They all require a certain amount of balancing and faith that the legislature is going to be able to fix. If you're voting yes, that the legislature is going to be able to fix whatever's wrong with it.
That's to my point. Yeah.
Question 2, I felt strongest about that it wasn't a yes or no. but I think they all sort of have that. Maybe ranked choice voting. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, question 2 is 2 issues.
Yes, right.
It's 2 different issues.
Right, exactly.
It's whether you should fund and how you fund.
Right.
All
Yeah. How you raise the
combined
money and
into
what
one.
you should do with it.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
that gets to the argument of, what kind of complexity can you do
Yeah.
in a referendum
Yeah.
that's appropriate for what amounts to a statewide town meeting.
Yeah.
What level can you go to? We don't have any control of that, really.
And I think the referendum process got started because progressives back in the turn of the 20th century thought that legislatures were too beholden to big industrial interests.
Yeah. And they
that
were
this
right.
Yeah.
And
And
it
then
was-
they had a spate of these things, and then they went away. You didn't see any referendum in Maine
Right.
till Alan Caron got involved.
No, before me, the nuclear plant
Yeah.
shutdown is really, I think, what revived
In the 80s.
in the 80s, what
Yeah, so
revived the
there's nothing-
referendums in Maine. I don't remember many before that, but there were 3 or 4 of those, and then everybody got the idea that, ooh, that's the way we can do it, and including me.
I think there's kind of a, I don't know, a feeling of remorse or something bad about this election. But on the other hand, it's pretty amazing how we are deciding so many things. I mean, Washington is dysfunctional, and so much is happening at the states, which is good, bad, whatever. But it's just interesting to me that we saw the marriage equality campaign kind of roll out state by state and gain momentum, and now we have a United States Supreme Court decision on it, and so these other issues happening in states, whether it's by referendum or just legislatures, I think it's fascinating, and it's progress.
Yeah. And I agree. And because of the dysfunction in Washington, we're going to see more of it. So my point is, if we can regulate marijuana, why don't we regulate referendums a little bit? Something we've got to pay a little more attention to as we. If it becomes 10 next time,
right?
Yeah.
Or even 7 or 8.
My sister
at some
votes in
Could be
San Francisco, and there were 42 questions on the ballot.
Yeah.
Wow, that's a lot.
And people don't have the information.
Yeah.
Or the time or the inclination.
Right.
To manage that much. It's sort of like the citizen legislature.
Right. It's like, why we even have representatives and
Right.
senators?
Right.
But if the dysfunction in Washington continues to bleed into Augusta, I guess we will be seeing more.
Yeah, that's exactly
Because
right.
if you were behind, if there was some reform that you wanted to make, would you go through the trouble of trying to convince a majority of the legislature to pass a bill that the governor will veto that you can get 2/3 to override, or will you just put it on the ballot?
Right.
If
That's
it's only
the
$100,000 for
Yeah.
the threshold, it's it's pretty.
Yeah. So question 3, what's going to happen there?
My sense is it's going to go down because everywhere I go, I see no on 3 signs. Every time I leave Portland.
Exactly. Yeah.
But I don't know. The polling shows them with a pretty strong lead. What do you think?
I think that's going to be real close.
Yeah.
I think it'll be close. I've been driving rural Maine, going back and forth to Bangor, and I hate the turnpike, so I always, when I have time, take the back roads. It's just overwhelming. The 3 vote. And I think if there was ever a chance to beat the NRA in Maine, this is it.
Yeah.
This is as good as it has been, and I think there's a legitimate chance to win it, but it won't surprise me at all if it, like question 1, goes down in a relatively close. But what do you think?
Well, I agree that the signs suggest a possible defeat, but I do think sometimes the signs, I think often the signs are not, reliable evidence of a predicted outcome. I think it's going to pass. I think the question 3 people have done a really good job putting together this bipartisan committee, including people from former Senator Collins staffers, just getting people on board with the facts around background checks and this idea that, it doesn't matter how good people in Maine are. It's not a question of, this isn't about denying Maine people their traditional hunting rights. It's about criminals buying guns in Maine and using them in other states. And we have I think people are going to sense some sort of civic duty to help address the problem of gun violence in places like Chicago and, Massachusetts and New York, where, there's a lot of gun violence and a lot of the guns come from Maine.
Yeah.
And so we should do our part.
If it does win, I think it's going to be a signal moment for a shift in balance in the power of not just the NRA, but the sports men and women network that, just 10 or 15, 20 years ago was so strong, so widespread that nothing could be passed that they didn't want passed. And I get a sense over time they're losing influence. And that means the NRA would be losing influence here. So to me, if it passes, that will be a signal moment of a shift in the balance.
So you were in the legislature after Sandy Hook, right?
Yes.
And all the legislature did was make it easier to have secret.
Was the year of Sandy Hook 2010?
Yeah, it was 2010 because it was.
So I was just
it was before the last presidential election, and there were bills to limit magazine size and some kind of version of a concealed or a assault weapons ban, and the only thing that got through it all, and a background check bill, and the only thing that got through it all was a bill that would allow exempt concealed weapons permits from the public records laws.
It's
And
well,
yeah, and so I mean that was to me that was the strength of that lobby was the way that even after like the most horrible example of gun violence you could possibly imagine, you still couldn't. And people say, oh, the legislatures, they just pass feel-good things. No, they don't.
I know. Well, what was more concerning
they can't.
When I was in the legislature, what was even more concerning was the creeping of bills sponsored by the NRA that Democrats felt they had to vote for because, they just throw them a bone kind of thing. Like even like so-called liberal Southern Democrats in the state felt like, well, we got to give the rural people. And it wasn't the rural people; it was the NRA in the hallways of Augusta, just passing law after law, making Maine one of the most gun-friendly states for no reason. I mean, there's no reason why we have to have a, open carry or not need a permit for a concealed weapon or there's just no. There's no reason why the governor in a state of emergency. There's one bill that the NRA got through that even in a state of the if the governor declares a state of emergency, still there can be no orders issued about people's guns. I mean, like, why out of the blue when we can't pass any other laws do we have to pass a law like that? Like, I mean, it's crazy.
So I mean, I think to Alan's point, if this passes, that says to lawmakers from both parties that you've been wrong, that this is not where the public is. Your assumptions about what voters want have been wrong for a while.
And that will reduce influence in the halls.
Which is, I think, why it's getting opposed. Because, on its merits, it's a pretty, like, they make it sound like everybody's lending guns all the time.
I know.
I mean, that it's a big,
I do think the
big socialism in the woods.
I do think the yes side has had the better messaging and the better advertising by far. I mean, I think the no side hasn't been able to use their core argument that this is the door being cracked open or they're going to come and take all your guns. I mean, for whatever reason, they're not. That message is not consistently being used this time in the way it has in the past. So we'll see. I think it's going to be close. Now, question 4, it's not going to be close.
You think it's going to win big?
Oh, yeah, I think it will. I mean, there are too many people who either now work for minimum wage or have worked for minimum wage or know somebody who is working for minimum wage all across the state. And I think the no side has had a real struggle putting up a mess. It's going to hurt small business, okay, but it's going to hurt all. I think it's been hard for them to define a compelling.
Right, it's going to help some small businesses. Because people have more money to spend in them.
Right.
I agree with everything Alan just said.
I think it's going to go big.
And it's not just minimum wage; it's under $12, which is a lot more people than just $7.50.
And the criticism of the business community, which has had a chance through the years to allow a slow increase in the minimum wage. They had every chance in the world, and they haven't done it. And now lamenting that it's too much money, and instead of 12, it should be 10. I mean, what are you talking about?
Or they'll say 12 is okay, but no indexing.
Yeah.
Right. Well,
So
that's how we
this is-
got in this trouble in
Right.
the first place.
Yeah.
But I think this is an example where the referendum process is so good, because we tried so many times to get the minimum wage increased with all the same arguments, trying to get the business people to the table and to do the right thing and the reasonable thing. And there were options that would have put them in a far better position that they chose not to take. And so now I think this is this is a shining good example of the referendum process.
I agree.
If it passes.
If it passes, it's terrible. It's an example of too complicated. All right, and then 5. What do you think?
I don't know.
I think 5 is close.
I think it's close too.
It's close, yeah. I expect it will pass.
Yeah.
I do, only because people want to do something, and they don't know what to do. And they've just endured another couple of months, especially the last couple of weeks, of this horrendous politics, polluting their households.
Right.
Through the television, and I think people will want to do something. There's a lot of confusion about it. Hardly anybody who isn't close to it understands it, which would
huge
suggest to you
problem.
there'd be a no vote. But I still think it might squeak through.
Mm-hmm.
I certainly hope it does. I mean, it seems people are confused about it, but also worried that the challenge of the technology. And I think, oh my goodness, in this day and age where you have these algorithms that can trade stocks in nanoseconds, and that we can run this unbelievable complicated data so quickly that we couldn't figure out in a state of like 1 million people, 430 towns, we couldn't do it. It just, come on. I mean, we've got the technology to do rank checks voting. I'm confident that we could. Now, whether or not we get the money for it, that's another question.
What I hear is that people think it's easy to game because they don't completely understand it. And I think a lot of people ran for mayor of Portland the first time because they thought, why not? Nobody really knows how it works, And what they found out was that you still have to get the most votes. It's not. It's not. There's not really any magic to it. There's nobody goes from like 15th to first. In fact, when they did all those rounds, nobody even moved up one notch. I remember correctly. Everybody stayed in exactly the position. They'd get eliminated, and they just stayed in position. But I would like to see it pass, just because I think it would make better campaigns.
Absolutely. Whether it actually impacts the negativity is one of the biggest questions I have. I mean, I hope it does, but I'm not convinced, only because so much of the negative ads are sponsored by these outside groups that don't really, I don't know if they'll get it.
Right. Well, you know what it would eliminate, I would think, was that ad that they ran with you. Where they said, vote for Cynthia Dill, the real progressive, not Angus King. And it was by the Republicans, which that kind of...
thanks for reminding me of that.
Sorry, I'm glad I could bring that up.
No, just kidding.
Yeah, great. Thanks a lot, Greg. That's
that's a good
that's
example.
the end of this show.
Right.
Yeah, right.
If we had ranked choice voting in that race, my life would have been so much easier. I can't tell you how many people I talked to who said, you know what, you're a great candidate, but it's not your time. There's no way we can let Charlie Summers go down, and we can't have another split vote. And, and it was just like, oh, darn.
Right.
Well, look, I hope it will pass. I think there's no question but that it does improve the discourse in campaigns, only because somebody then has to look at being friendly to somebody who's not going to win and being friendly to their supporters. In some ironic way, I think we just saw an example of this working nationally. This would be hard for some people to see the parallel, but it was the Sanders campaign, where both Clinton people and Trump people wanted Sanders supporters, and he managed to get through an entire primary without anybody really assaulting him, without anybody undercutting him or running negative ads, the whole campaign. To me, that was an interesting illustration of what happens when a candidate is thinking beyond their own base and has to.
Yeah, that is interesting.
Yeah, and
Or-
so I think it would improve the discourse, no question.
When the governor high-fived Elliot Cutler.
Right.
That was the same kind of thing.
Exactly.
Right.
It was. Yeah, absolutely. They were working to get Cutler's was following, and they were looking to pull over. So enormously friendly with Elliot Cutler. They hated him like
Right,
3
right.
weeks before. But the other thing that I think will be interesting is Maine has kind of led the nation on these multi-candidate races. I mean, we are the cutting edge. And if that's going to begin to happen nationally more, which is happening in this cycle, I mean, 4 candidates, it's very surprising. Even though they're not great candidates, the fact that they're there and they're on the ballot makes what's happened in Maine more important nationally. If we pass this bill, number 5, I think the same thing's going to happen. The whole country is going to be wondering, like, how is that going to work and how could it help us in some other states? I do think it will spread slowly. I don't think it'll be overnight.
I said we had the technology here in Maine to do ranked choice voting. I'm just trying to get my head around ranked choice voting in the Electoral College. I don't know how that
Right.
could work. I mean,
Right.
it would be that would be.
Well, I'm
very
not sure that
challenging.
ranked choice voting is the only way to fix the problem. There
Right,
have been
right.
primaries, there are runoff elections, there are lots
Yeah.
of, the ranked choice folks have made a big deal about how all the other stuff is bad. I don't agree with that. I mean, people will experiment with different ways to fix the multi-candidate problem that we have. But I do think Maine will be under the spotlight if this passes, with other states expressing interest in watching how it goes.
I think we could do a whole nother podcast about what the future is for parties.
Sure.
Because I think it's fascinating. Like, you can really see there's some things they're still really good at, like raising money and getting out the vote, and some things that they're just not doing a good job anymore about it in terms of consolidating opinion, creating an army behind an idea. So maybe this is going to be either the savior of parties or the death knell.
I think it's definitely going to be a realignment.
Yeah.
You're just seeing it in the polls and who's supporting Clinton, who's supporting Trump. It's not going to be your typical, socioeconomic or other, stratified ways to identify party people. It's changing.
Yeah. And
All right, well,
presenting
maybe-
great new challenges for both parties. This is a piece that I'm writing on the Sunday after the election.
Okay.
Both parties are really going to be challenged now in some new ways to hold the coalitions together.
Yeah.
And particularly on the Republican side, they now have the weirdest coalition
I
they've
know.
ever had
Right.
of white working class people and corporate America in one party. Good luck with that.
Yeah.
Well, that's what's interesting, though, and we don't have time. We're going to end, but I think the corporate role in American politics is really fascinating, and I think we could spend a few podcasts talking about that. Just some of these companies really coming out and being players in the election has been interesting.
Okay, so you want to get together next Thursday and talk about where we were wrong?
Sure.
Okay, then. Well, thank you, Alan, and thank you, Thank you, Alan, and thank you, Cynthia, and we will talk to you soon.
Thank you.
All right.